Today, a bit of relief for the low paid, but hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics World. Latest posts covering finance and property news. Well, Australia's minimum wage will increase by 8.6%, and award workers will get a 5.75% pay boost in a Fair Work Commission released this week. The new national minimum wage will be $23.23 per hour and $882.80 per week based on a 38-hour week.
The national minimum wage sets a minimum rate of pay for employees in the National Industrial Relations System who are not covered by a modern award or an enterprise agreement. It does not set a floor for minimum wage rates in modern awards. Only a small number of employees, about 0.7% of all Australian employees, are paid the national minimum wage. The second task is to review modern award minimum wages. There are 121 modern awards which apply to employees in the National Industrial Relations Systems in various industries and occupations. There are also a small number of modern enterprise awards which apply to specific business enterprises. Each modern award sets minimum rates of pay for employees working in the industry, occupations or enterprises covered by the award. In setting award rates of pay, the Commission is required to take into account the amount of the national minimum wage. Approximately 20.5% of all Australian employees are paid in accordance with the minimum wage rates in modern awards. There are some additional categories of employees who are also affected by the review in a less direct way by review outcomes being flowed on by various means. However, these categories of employees are small in number. Our decision in this annual wage review will therefore operate upon the wages of about a quarter of Australian employees. The characteristics of employees who rely on modern award minimum wage rates and are directly affected by our decision are significantly different to the workforce as a whole. They mostly work part-time hours, are predominantly female and almost half are casual employees. They are also much more likely to be low paid. The broader economic effect of annual wage review decisions is limited. The total wages cost of the modern award reliant workforce constitutes about 11% of the national wage bill. Wage increases awarded in last year's annual wage review decision directly contributed less than 10% of the total wages growth in 2022. Furthermore, most of the modern award reliant workforce is employed under a relatively small number of modern awards covering specific industries or occupations. This means the effect of the review decision differs markedly as between industry sectors. The Fair Work Act requires us to take into account specific considerations in conducting the annual wage review. These include relative living standards, the needs of the low paid, workforce participation, and the performance and competitiveness of the national economy. In addition, amendments to the Fair Work Act made by the Parliament in 2022 require us to give greater emphasis to the issues of gender equality and job security. We have taken all these considerations into account. In conducting the review, we have consulted with a range of stakeholders, including the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the Australian Council of Trade Unions, the Australian Industry Group, various employer and employee organisations, individual employers and employees, the Australian Government and state governments. Each of these have been given extensive opportunity to make submissions both in writing and at a hearing before us conducted on 17 May 2023. A number of parties have advanced specific proposals for wage adjustments, and these are set out in our written decision. However, we emphasise that the annual wage review process is not one of adjudication between competing proposals. while we have taken the submissions that have been made into account, ultimately our statutory task is to make our own assessment as to what constitutes a safety net of fair minimum wages. The current combination of economic circumstances, namely low unemployment, falling real wages and high inflation, is very unusual and presents a particular challenge in this year's review. A further challenge is the expected sharp slowdown in economic growth over the next year. In our consideration, we have placed significant weight on the impact of the current rate of inflation on the ability of modern award-reliant employees, especially the low-paid, to meet their basic financial needs. Inflation is reducing the real value of these employees' incomes and causing households financial stress. We have also taken into account the recent robustness of the labour market and the fact that increases to modern award minimum wages will provide a disproportionate benefit to female workers and thus may contribute to reducing the aggregate gender pay gap across the workforce. Moderating factors we have taken into account include the forthcoming increase to the superannuation guarantee contributions rate, and the effect that an expected weakening in the labour market may have on casual employees and on particular industries. We have also had regard to the need to avoid entrenching high inflation expectations by taking a perceived wage indexation approach, and also the recent weak performance in productivity growth. The outcome we have determined in this year's review is as follows. The most important aspect of our decision concerns the adjustment to minimum wage rates in modern awards. We have decided that award rates of pay will be increased by 5.75%, effective from 1 July 2023. As the total wages of modern award-reliant workers constitute a limited proportion of the National Wage Bill, we are confident that the increase we have determined will make only a modest contribution to total wages growth in 2023-24 and will consequently not cause or contribute to any wage price spiral. We acknowledge that this increase will not maintain the real value of modern award minimum wages, nor reverse the reduction in real value which has occurred over recent years. However, the level of wage increase we have determined is, we consider, the most that can reasonably be justified in the current economic circumstances. In the medium to long term, it is desirable that modern award minimum wages maintain their real value and increase in line with the trend rate of national productivity growth. A return to that path is likely to be possible in future reviews when there is a reversion to a lower inflationary environment and trend productivity growth. In relation to the national minimum wage, we have decided to take two steps. The first step, which is a somewhat technical matter, is to end the alignment between the national minimum wage and the C14 classification wage rate in modern awards. The C14 rate was only ever intended to constitute a transitional entry rate for new employees. As such, it does not constitute a proper minimum wage safety net for award and agreement-free employees in ongoing employment. We consider that a wider review concerning the needs and circumstances of low-paid award and agreement-free employees is required, but the interim step we have decided to take in this review is to align the national minimum wage with the current C13 classification wage rate. The C13 rate is the lowest classification rate applicable to ongoing employment in most awards. The second step is that we have further increased the rate of the national minimum wage by 5.75%, and these adjustments will take effect on 1 July 2023.
But the increase in the minimum wage comes with an important technicality. The Fair Work Commission said that it was confident the hourly pay increases would only make a, quote, modest contribution to wages growth in 23-24 and will not cause or contribute to any wage price spiral. We acknowledge that this increase will not maintain the real value of modern award minimum wages, nor reverse the reduction in real value that has occurred over recent years, the Commission said. The boost in wages will begin in the first full period of pay after July the 1st. Significantly for the minimum wage, the Fair Work Commission said that it would end the alignment between the national minimum wage rate and the so-called C14 classification wage rate in modern awards, arguing that the C14 rate was too low and no longer constituted a proper minimum wage safety net. So instead, it realigns the national minimum wage with a slightly higher C13 classification wage rate in modern awards, and after that, it would lift the C13 wage rate by 5.75%. However, the Fair Work Commission framed that increase in the minimum wage as only being a 5.75% increase because that's the size of the increase that will occur for the slightly higher C13 classification award rate that the minimum wage will now be aligned with. The current minimum wage is $21.38 an hour, but the new minimum wage will be $23.23 per hour, which represents an increase of $1.85 an hour, which is 8.65% higher. Now, of course, the Albanese government supported the idea of lifting the minimum wage to match inflation so the real wages of Australia's low-paid workers don't go backwards. But headline inflation, as measured by the Consumer Price Index, was running at 7% in the March quarter. So the 5.75% increase in the award is the biggest in history and will help 2.7 million workers, Treasurer Jim Chalmers said on Friday, but they're still going backwards. So the decision will see a small group of workers, around 0.7% of workers actually, somewhere around 100,000 people, on the lowest minimum wage of $21.38, getting an 8.6% pay increase to $23.23 an hour. The bigger group, around 20.5% of workers, or around 2.8 million people on award pay rates, will see a 5.75% pay rise from their current pay rates. Sally McManus, the Secretary of the Australian Council of Trade Unions, the ACTU, was quick to welcome the pay increases. This is an absolutely essential increase for all of the people in Australia who are struggling so hard at the moment just to survive, to pay their rent, to pay their groceries, to pay all of the basics, she said. They are the people who actually keep the economy going everywhere. Ms. McManus said that the 5.75% increase in award wage rates was not the 7% increase unions pushed for, but it was a hell of a lot more than what employers had argued for. However, the Australian Industry Group, whose members employ just around 750,000 people, said that the 5.75% increase in the award rate was very disappointing. Innes Willox, AI Group's chief executive, said the Fair Work Commission had obviously tried to strike the right balance between addressing the cost of living pressures and wage costs for employers, but he said the lift in pay rates will be very likely to see unemployment and underemployment push higher. It is some consolation that a still higher increase, as proposed by the ACTU, would have added substantially more to the risks, he said. That said, the decision will add significantly and immediately to the costs facing the large number of businesses that employ under award conditions. For some businesses, these pressures may be particularly intense due to the realignment of the national minimum wage to the higher base level, effectively increased by the NNW by 8.6%. This increase comes on the back of the Fair Work Commission's decision to implement historically high increases last year. The cumulative impact on employers will be substantial, he warned. And Business New South Wales, formerly the New South Wales Business Chamber, also criticised the increase. Daniel Hunter, Business New South Wales chief executive, said it will see the biggest increase in the national minimum wage in 30 years, putting jobs and businesses at risk. The large wage increase comes at a time when a growing proportion of businesses, about 1 in 4 employers, have indicated to us that they will shed staff in the next 3 months, he said. When announcing the decision on Friday, the Fair Work Commission said the national minimum wage and award wage rates would both increase by 5.75% next month. It said there will be some technical details about the minimum wage regarding the award classification that was linked to, but it did not spell out in plain English that the minimum wage rate was actually going to increase by 8.6%. That spread confusion among media outlets, economists, major political parties and employer associations. Many only realised that the minimum wage will be increased by 8.6% when they read the details of the decision. But Treasurer Jim Chalmers and Minister of Employment and Workplace Relations Tony Burke later hailed the pay increases, saying they showed the federal government was delivering on its election promise. The 5.75% increase to awards is the biggest in history and will help 2.7 million workers, they said in a joint statement. The technical change the Commission has made in the base rate of the minimum wage means that from the 1st of July this year, the minimum wage rate actually does increase by 8.6%. Across the two annual wage review decisions in our first year in government, the wages of minimum wage earners have increased by nearly $3 an hour. People on low and modest wages have the least capacity to deal with rising costs of living. That's why the government argued for a decent pay rise for these workers, and the government welcomes the decision from the Independent Fair Work Commission, they said. But some economists have warned that the lift in the minimum wage and award rates will add to inflationary pressures and increase the likelihood of more rate rises. Josh Williamson and Faris Saad from Citi said that they now upwardly revised their end-of-year wage forecast to 4.1%, up from 3.5%. They said with higher than expected inflation in April, still rising house prices, and a new wages outlook, they now believe the Reserve Bank would lift rates at least twice more. It seems they think the cash rate target will lift from 3.85% to 4.35% in the coming months. But economist Gareth Aird from CBA said the wage increases may have only a small impact on the economy. The total wage costs of the modern award-reliant workforce constitutes only 11% of the national wage bill, he wrote in a note to clients on Friday. And also worth keeping in mind that a pre-tax wage increase results in a post-tax pay rise being less than the wage increase for most workers due to the marginal tax system, he said. And meanwhile, the Australian Council of Social Services, ACOS, said the Fair Work Commission's decision was much needed recognition of the struggles people on low incomes faced. The Fair Work Commission's determination today is a positive step towards improving the lives of low-paid workers amid the cost of living crisis, ACOS Chief Executive Crisanta Goli said, but more needs to be done to lift the incomes of people with the least and tackle the causes of inflation. We urge the government to tackle the drivers of inflation at their source and address the skyrocketing prices of essentials like rents and energy. Further interest rate rises are not the answer. And by the way, earlier this week, the Reserve Bank Governor Philip Lowe said wages haven't been the driver of inflation, and at the moment there's no sign of higher prices leading to higher wages, leading to higher prices, he said. But we have to be vigilant here, he cautioned. It's been reported that in their budget estimates, Treasury were working on the assumption of a 7% increase in the minimum wage and a 4% increase in higher paid awards. So that would have resulted in an average increase of around 4.7%. So as such, the Fair Work Commission's decision looks like about a 1.25% percentage point upside surprise compared to the Treasury forecasts. Now, importantly, thinking about the impact of the increase in the minimum wage is okay when you're trying to think about what impacts as a wage increase for the average Australian worker. But it's not appropriate when thinking about what it means for the wage price index, because the wage price index is an expenditure-weighted price index, just as in the CPI. From the ABS, for the WPI, expenditure weights are a measure of the relative importance of each elementary aggregate based on employers, expenditures on wages and salaries. As such, to work out the impact of the increase, we will need to know what the share award represents of the total wages bill. Bear in mind, the WPI is not weighted by the share of employers. So, as the Fair Work Commission noted in the release, the broader economic effect of annual wage reviews is limited. The total wages cost of the modern award-reliant workforce is about 11% of the national wage bill. Wage increases awarded in the last year's annual wage review decision directly contributed to less than 10% of the total wages growth of 2022. Furthermore, most of the award-reliant workforce is employed under a relatively small number of modern awards covering specific industries or occupations. This means the effect of the review decision differs markedly as between industry sectors. And so, if awards represented, let's say, 10% of the WPI, then the contribution from the larger increase in minimum wages this year to wage inflation is around 0.12 percentage points. As such, with the wage price index up 3.4% to the year in December 2022, if all else is held constant, then this decision will likely lift the wage inflation to around 3.5% by the end of 2023. But of course, we don't know what else is constant, and we'll have to see how wage inflation plays out based on the broader economy. It looks to me, though, that we're probably going to see a WPI hitting perhaps a peak of 4% or more by the end of 2023, bearing in mind, of course, that there is a significant number of people who have individual arrangements, and of course there's significant upward pressure given the steady inflation rate at the moment. Now, if you stand back and think about all of this, there's three observations. Firstly, of course, if you are on the business side of the equation, then you don't want to pay more because, of course, businesses are under pressure, etc., etc. But if you're on the other side of the equation and you are a low-paid worker, then this is relatively good news, although for most people they are still going backwards relative to the current inflation rate. And, of course, there's been no make-up from recent years where they've gone backwards. But the final point here is that there's a lot of number wanging going on at the moment, insofar that the true impact on the overall wage price index is hard to discern. Not least because there are many other moving parts and many businesses will be paying more. Indeed, some employees are pushing for significantly higher wages as well. But there is going to be a small upward pressure here in terms of inflation. And when I think about the RBA next week, this is another reason why I think it's more likely they're going to lift than not. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.